Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are unpacking a story that honestly completely redefines the limits of human endurance. We're talking about the incredible 9 year survival epic of Flight NC-16002. Just think about it for a second. How do you survive when the entire world has officially declared you dead? Well, we're going to break down the whole timeline, the crazy science behind it, and the sheer grit it took to live through this absolute mystery. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp the scale of this thing, we gotta go back to the very beginning. The date is December 27th, 1948. You've got this massive Douglas DC-3 passenger plane cruising smoothly at 8,300 feet over the Atlantic, heading out of Miami, Florida. It's 8:13 p.m., Captain Robert Miller and his co-pilot are up in the cockpit, and everything is completely routine. Just a normal flight, right? But suddenly, their connection with San Juan air traffic control just starts to break up. Captain Miller casually reports a minor technical issue, and then, literally 10 seconds later, the plane vanishes from the ATC radar. No distress signal, no explosion, just gone. And their last known location? Right smack in the heart of the infamous Bermuda Triangle. Now, we're talking about 134 souls on board here. That's 125 passengers and 9 crew members. What air traffic control couldn't see on their screens was that flight NC-16002 had flown directly into a freak, completely unmapped storm vortex. Inside that cockpit, it was absolute sensory chaos. The storm was tossing this massive aircraft around like it was a plastic toy. The electronics, the compass, the radar, the whole shebang just totally shut down. They were flying completely blind at terrifying speeds for almost half an hour. When they finally punched through the storm, the engines were totally dead, and they were plunging straight toward the ocean. But right as they're bracing for what should be a fatal water landing, the co-pilot spots an uncharted island directly in their path. And this is where the very first impossible miracle of our story happens. As the plane is plummeting toward the jungle canopy, everyone is bracing for total destruction, right? But instead, it crashes directly into this massive, ancient tree. The wildly thick, sprawling branches of this colossal tree actually caught the fuselage, tangling it up like a giant net. It was a violent, utterly terrifying impact for sure, but that tree absorbed the fatal force of the crash. Against all laws of physics, against all probability, that singular piece of nature saved the lives of 134 people. But as you'll see, while their lives were spared, their nightmare was honestly just getting started.
So now they're on the ground in a completely uncharted jungle. This required pure, immediate survival logistics. Captain Miller, even with a severe head injury, immediately stepped up to establish some order. At the same time, a retired Army doctor who happened to be on board, Dr. Evelyn Reed, sprang into action to treat the dozens of injured passengers. Without an obvious natural water source, their first big win was figuring out how to catch and filter rainwater. But honestly, the most incredible moment of ingenuity? A teenage boy, using basic science, took a lens right out of his eyeglasses, focused the sun's rays onto some dry leaves, and, after hours of agonizing effort, sparked their very first fire. It kept them warm, let them cook, and crucially, kept the wild animals at bay. Those early days were just a brutal roller coaster of tragedy and triumphs. I mean, they had to eat, but they didn't know what was actually safe. Tragically, a middle-aged passenger ate a poisonous fruit and died in agony within hours. That was the island's first casualty. Realizing they desperately needed safe protein, they teamed up with a hunter who was actually one of the passengers. They literally dismantled parts of the plane's metal exterior, ground it down on rocks to forge spears, and successfully hunted the island's vicious wild boars. And amidst all this chaos, the plane's engineer, Arthur Vance, desperately managed to jury-rig the broken radio for one single transmission. He sent out their coordinates, but the battery died immediately. And nobody replied.
Meanwhile, out in the rest of the world, $45 million. That is the staggering amount the U.S. government spent launching what was the biggest search and rescue operation in history up to that point. The Navy scoured every square inch of the Atlantic they could possibly think of. But here's the kicker. Because the plane had been tossed so incredibly far off its original flight path by that vortex, they were looking in completely the wrong place. After an agonizing week, the search slowed down, and eventually, it just stopped. And this brilliantly illustrates the heartbreaking dual reality of this story. Right at the 6-month mark, the U.S. government officially declared all 134 passengers dead. The families were told to grieve, to try and move on, and the world just closed the book on flight NC-16002. But incredibly, back on the island, the survivors were birthing a whole new generation. About a year and a half into their isolation, a young couple welcomed a healthy baby boy. They had buried their dead with honor, They established farming and created a fully functioning micro-society. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were actually living.
But as we track this timeline, the crushing weight of isolation really begins to take its toll. By year 2, the desperation to just get back to civilization became completely unbearable. Engineer Arthur Vance led a massive project to build a raft out of plane wreckage and vines. 25 of the strongest survivors set sail, promising everyone they'd bring back help. But the ocean is unforgiving. Just miles from the island, a horrific storm capsized their boat. Only a handful managed to swim back. 16 people drowned. It was this catastrophic psychological blow that completely shattered any hope of ever escaping by sea.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the grim mathematics of their reality by the end of year 2. It's undeniable. They started with 134. 5 impulsive younger folks had vanished on a tiny raft early on. 15 had succumbed to disease or just sheer psychological despair. Add the 16 who drowned in that great boat escape, and the island's population had plummeted to 98. The island was lethal, and the survivors were slowly waking up to the terrifying realization that this place might just be their graveyard. Fast forward to year 5, and the psychological toll deepens even further. Resources on the edges of the island were really thinning out, so a scouting party ventured deep into the island's uncharted interior. And what they found? It chilled them to the bone. Deep inside a dark cave, sitting right amidst the ruins of what looked like an ancient settlement, they found a human skeleton. And right next to it, a rusted, heavily corroded piece of metal from a much older aircraft. It was the ultimate terrifying proof. They were not the first victims of this cursed island, and the people who came before them had never made it out. So the absolutely crucial point here is that this discovery completely fractured their society. By year 7, the population dwindled down to 82. Starvation, illness, and intense stress had claimed 16 more lives, and the community violently split into 2 warring factions. Captain Miller led one group that stubbornly believed they had to keep trying to signal the outside world. But a second faction, led by a deeply cynical survivor, argued that trying to escape only brought death. They firmly believed their fate was sealed and that they should just surrender to the island. Hope was almost entirely extinguished at this point.
Just when you think things literally cannot possibly get worse, year 8 arrives. A monstrous cyclone rips through the island, bringing these torrential rains and tearing apart the shelters they had spent nearly a decade building. They're left shivering out in the open, fully convinced the end has finally come. But mere weeks later, the island is hit by a massive earthquake. The ground literally splits open. It is a terrifying, totally apocalyptic moment. But, Mother Nature works in mysterious ways. This massive earthquake physically shifted the deeply embedded, rusted wreckage of the plane, and in doing so, it unearthed wires and electrical panels that had been buried in the dirt for 8 long years.
And this leads us to an absolute mind-bending scientific miracle. It's year 9. Engineer Arthur Vance is inspecting the newly unearthed wreckage from the earthquake. At that exact moment in space, a massive solar flare, an intense eruption of electromagnetic radiation, strikes Earth's magnetic field. It's a highly rare astronomical event. The combination of the earthquake forcing those corroded wires to physically reconnect, combined with the immense atmospheric electrical charge of the solar flare, caused the impossible. When Vance lazily pressed a button on the dead radio, the green light flickered on. No way, right? Imagine the trembling in Arthur Vance's hands as he grabs that microphone. He says, "Mayday, Mayday. This is flight NC 1600, 2. We are alive. We have been stuck on an island for 9 years. Over in Miami air traffic control, an operator hears this static-filled ghost voice coming through the speakers. At first, they totally think it's some cruel prank, but when Vance rattles off the captain's exact name, the flight date, and the specific registration number, the entire control room drops into dead silence. The U.S. government immediately scrambles the Navy. Now, lacking modern GPS, they have to manually scour the islands in the Bermuda Triangle grid. Back on the island, the survivors light a massive signal fire. And finally, after 9 incredibly long years, a U.S. Navy ship spots the smoke. As that ship approaches the shore, the 82 remaining survivors just run out onto the beach, weeping, screaming, hugging one another. It was finally over. The story naturally became an absolute global sensation, and it was perfectly captured a year later in 1958 when James Baldwin published the smash hit bestseller Lost in the Echo, which immortalized the 82 souls who simply refused to die. We've looked at the sheer ingenuity, the heartbreaking tragic losses, and the insane cosmic alignment that eventually brought these people home. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this. When the government gives up on you, when the radios go dead, when your friends fall away, and you are staring right into the abyss of an uncharted jungle, could you hold on to hope for 9 years in the dark? Or would the island claim you too? Think about that for a second. Thank you so much for exploring this incredible journey with me today. Stay curious and keep learning.